There are two kinds of men who can sit at a table while being talked about: the kind who don't know it's happening, and the kind who do know, but haven't yet decided what they're going to do about it. I spent an entire dinner being the second kind, cutting my pork tenderloin with a steady hand while my son's future in-laws said things about me, and about him, that I will carry until I'm in the ground. My son Sean is 31. He met Lucia at a trade conference in Charlotte 3 years ago. She was there representing her father's import company. He was there because I'd pushed him towards sales after he decided the workshop wasn't for him. I don't hold that against either of them. The boy has my stubbornness and his mother's charm, which means he can sell anything to anybody but refuses to be told how. I understand that more than he knows. Lucia is kind. I want to say that clearly, because what happened had nothing to do with her and everything to do with the people who raised her. She's warm and funny, and she makes my son laugh the way his mother used to make me laugh, gently, so he never minds it. When Sean brought her home the first time, I liked her immediately. I liked her enough to start wondering whether her family would be the problem. They were. Fabrizio and Rossana flew in from Milan on a Thursday in late April. I picked them up from Charlotte Douglas in my truck, the same 2011 F-150 I've driven since before my wife passed, because I don't own anything fancier and don't see the point of pretending otherwise. Fabrizio came through arrivals pulling a carry-on that probably cost more than my first month's rent. He looked at the truck the way a man looks at a menu item he didn't order. Rossana smiled at me the way you smile at someone holding a door for you, polite, efficient, like the smile was doing its job and nothing more. Welcome to North Carolina, I told them. Good to finally meet you both. Yes, Fabrizio said, the drive is long? About 40 minutes, I said. He looked out the window at the interstate and said nothing. I'd planned dinner for Saturday evening at my place. I have about 4 acres outside of Concord, a workshop out back where I build furniture, custom pieces mostly, some restoration, and a house I've been adding to and fixing since 1998. Nothing grand, good bones, honest wood, a porch that faces west. My late wife Carol picked the site, said she wanted to watch the sun go down from her own land every evening she had left. She got 11 years of sunsets on that porch before she didn't. I made the dining room table myself. I built it 12 years ago, out of reclaimed heart pine I'd salvaged from a mill in Salisbury being torn down. Took me 3 weekends to get the planks right and another 2 to finish the joinery. Carol cried when I set it in the dining room for the first time. Said it looked like something out of a magazine, except warmer. We ate every meal at that table. Holidays, homework, arguments, reconciliations. When she got sick and couldn't manage the stairs anymore, we moved her bed into the front room and I'd bring her meals on a tray. But she still insisted on Sunday dinners at the table. Said it kept things normal. It's the most important piece of furniture I've ever built, and most people who sit at it have no idea. Fabrizio and Rossana didn't know either, but they had opinions about it anyway. Here's what nobody in that dining room knew about me. Not Sean, not Lucia, certainly not her parents. When I was 26 years old, I spent 3 years working at a furniture manufacturer outside of Vicenza, in the Veneto region of northern Italy. This was 1993, 94, 95. I'd gone over on a work visa, part of a small program that connected American craftsmen with old world workshops. I spent those years learning joinery techniques most American furniture makers had never seen, eating pasta I couldn't pronounce, and getting yelled at by men twice my age in a language I understood less and less poorly with every passing month. I came home fluent. Not textbook fluent. I never got the subjunctive fully right, but the kind of fluent you earn by living inside a language until it starts to feel like yours. The kind where you dream in it, argue in it, without reaching for words. Nobody back home ever asked. It never came up at a job site in Concord. It wasn't something I announced at dinner parties. It was just a part of me that stayed quiet because nothing in my daily life ever needed it. Until Saturday evening. Dinner had been going the way I'd expected, careful and a little stiff, everyone on their best behavior. I'd made roast pork with apple and mustard, sweet potatoes, biscuits. Fabrizio ate with the expression of a man tolerating a layover. Rossana asked if I had olive oil for the bread. They'd been speaking English all evening, which I appreciated. But somewhere between the main course and the second bottle of wine, when Sean and Lucia stepped into the kitchen to check on dessert, Fabrizio leaned toward his wife and said something low in Italian, eyes moving around the room the way eyes move when they think the coast is clear. He said, "The table is amateur. You can see where the wood hasn't taken the finish evenly, something a child would make." Rossana answered without missing a beat. "Everything here is like this, functional but without refinement. The man has built himself a life the size of his imagination." I kept my hands around my wine glass. I kept my face the way you keep a hand of cards, still, revealing nothing. A child's project. 12 years ago, Carol stood in this room and cried because that table was the most beautiful thing anyone had ever made for her. And the woman sitting across from me just called it a child's project while drinking wine from a glass I'd set out for her specifically. Fabrizio glanced over at me. I smiled at him. Easy, warm, the smile of a man who'd heard absolutely nothing. He smiled back and reached for his wine. You have no idea, I thought, and I have not yet decided what I'm going to do with that, but I will. Welcome to Dad's Real Revenge. Hit that like button and drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from. I read every single one. Get comfortable. This one's going somewhere. What came next was worse than an insult about a piece of furniture. About an hour after dinner, dessert cleared. Sean had taken Lucia out to show her something in the workshop. She'd asked about the rocking chair I still keep out there, the one that belonged to his mother. And I was alone at the table with Fabrizio and Rosanna for the first time all evening. They'd slip back into Italian the way people slip into their native language when they feel safe. Comfortable, unwatched. Rosanna said, "When does he sign?" Fabrizio answered, "After the engagement party. There's no hurry. He wants to be part of the family. He'll do it for the boy." She said, "And the son doesn't know the details?" Fabrizio said, "He knows enough. He believes it's an investment. In a manner of speaking it is, just not the kind the father imagines." I was looking at the candles on the table. I did not look up. He continued, "The business, the property. There's more than enough there to satisfy the creditors in Milan, and once the paperwork is structured correctly, it will be 18 months before anyone here understands what they've agreed to." Rosanna, the father seems trusting. Fabrizio, and I will hear this sentence until I am a very old man. He's not trusting, he's lonely. There's a difference. A lonely man will sign almost anything if you make him feel like family first. I picked up my wine glass, took a slow sip, set it back down without a sound. Sean came back in from the workshop just then, Lucia behind him talking about the chair's cane back. The room filled up with their voices and I let it. I laughed at something Sean said. I asked Fabrizio about his flight home. I played every note of that evening out to its natural end. When I shook Fabrizio's hand at the door later, I held it one beat longer than necessary, told him it had been a wonderful evening. He said, "We look forward to getting to know you better." "I'm certain you do," I said. I drove to the workshop after they left, not to work, just to sit. I pulled up a stool at my bench and looked at the tools on the wall, the chisels in their rack, the hand planes on the shelf, the Japanese pull saws Carol had given me one Christmas, after she'd driven 45 minutes to a specialty woodworking store and asked a stranger to help her pick the right ones. She hadn't known the first thing about saws. She just wanted to get it right. The business, the property, 18 months before anyone here understands what they've agreed to. I sat in that workshop for a long time. Then I called an old friend from my Vicenza years, a man named Doyle who'd stayed in Europe long after I came home and built a career in international trade consulting. The kind of work where you know the difference between a family venture and a fraud before you've finished reading the first page. The kind of man who knows people in places that matter. "Doyle," I said when he picked up, "it's been a while." 3 years at least, he said. "What's wrong?" I walked him through everything I'd heard, every word as best I could recall it. The creditors in Milan, the 18 months, the property, the lonely man. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Don't sign a single thing?" "I hadn't planned to," I said. "Give me 48 hours, he said. He called back in 36. What he had wasn't good. Fabrizio's import company, the one he'd been describing all weekend as thriving, expanding, a family institution built over generations, had filed for a form of creditor protection with the Italian Chamber of Commerce 14 months prior. There were outstanding debts to 3 separate creditors, 2 of them secured against the family estate outside Milan. The estate had liens going back 2 years. But here's the piece that turned my stomach in a way the dinner table comment never could. Doyle's contact had found the draft structure of the proposed joint venture. What they were calling an investment wasn't a partnership. It was a collateral arrangement. If I signed on using my business and the workshop property as my contribution, that property would be pledged against Fabrizio's existing European debts. If his company defaulted, and Doyle's contact believed it was a question of when, not if, international creditors would have a legal path to my land. The structure was designed to look like a family investment on American paperwork, while functioning as a debt guarantee on European paperwork. They hadn't flown across an ocean to welcome me into their family. They'd flown across an ocean because they needed something I owned. I sat with that for a full day before I did anything else. I thought about Carol, about the workshop she used to bring me coffee in on Saturday mornings, white mug with a bluebird on it, still sitting on the shelf above my bench. I thought about Sean, who I was almost certain didn't understand the full scope of what his future father-in-law was arranging. And I thought about Lucia, who I believed was being kept just informed enough to feel included, and not informed enough to ask the questions that would unravel it. Then I made myself a decision. Give them exactly what they're expecting. A grateful, widowed, somewhat simple American craftsman who wants to be part of something bigger than his workshop. I could play that role. I'd been playing easier ones my whole life. I called Fabrizio the next morning, told him I'd been thinking about the investment discussion they'd mentioned, and that I was genuinely interested in hearing more. I said it the way a man says something when he's already half convinced, a little eager, slightly nervous, like he's afraid the opportunity might pass him by. Fabrizio's voice warmed noticeably. He said he was delighted. He said we'd go through everything at the engagement party. Perfect, I said. I wouldn't miss it. For 3 weeks, I played my part like I'd been rehearsing for it my whole life. I asked Fabrizio thoughtful questions about his import business at Sunday brunch. I nodded carefully when he explained European market structures I was supposedly unfamiliar with. I let Rossana recommend a wine she thought I'd never tasted. I'd had it in Vicenza at age 27, sitting on the floor of a colleague's apartment, and I told her it was very refined. I thanked them for the opportunity. I used the word opportunity like it was the biggest word I knew. Meanwhile, I called a friend who'd spent 20 years in contract law before retiring. He reviewed what Doyle had pulled together. He said to me, "Whoever structured this was counting on you not having anyone to ask." Reasonable bet, I told him. Most people don't have a Doyle. The engagement party was 3 weeks later in Sean's backyard in Concord. String lights in the Oaks, tables with white paper runners, 60 people. Sean's friends, some of my old customers, Lucia's extended family from Charlotte, and Fabrizio and Rossana, who arrived with a bottle of Barolo they'd carried on the plane and presented to Sean with great ceremony. I had a folder in my truck. About an hour in, Fabrizio found me near the drink table and put a hand on my shoulder the way a man does when he thinks he's already won. "I wanted to speak with you," he said, "about the opportunity." "I've been hoping you would," I said. He reached into his jacket and produced a folded document. "A draft agreement," he said. "For your review, nothing final." I took it with both hands and held it like it was valuable. I thanked him, told him it meant a great deal that he'd trust me with something this significant. His eyes did the thing I'd been watching for. A brief flicker of satisfaction smoothed over fast. He thought he had me. He thought it was already done. "We can formalize everything at a small dinner Sunday," he said. "Just the family." "That sounds wonderful," I said. "I'll be there." He went back to working the room. I gave it 20 minutes. Then I found Sean, pulled him aside, and asked if he'd stand up with me at the end of the evening for a short toast. Something brief, just to welcome everyone officially. He said he'd be glad to. "Good," I said. "Let me go first." When Sean tapped his glass, and the yard went quiet, and 60 faces turned toward us, I looked out at all the people my son had gathered into his life. Lucia's aunts, the couple from my woodworking class who'd watched Sean grow up. Fabrizio and Rossana near the back, champagne in hand, looking like people who'd already privately celebrated. "I want to welcome the Benedetti family," I said. "It's not a small thing to fly across an ocean for someone you barely know yet. It says something about how much they love Lucia. I want to honor that tonight." Fabrizio dipped his chin, gracious, practiced. "Fact," I said. "I thought it only right to address them in their own language, out of respect for the distance they traveled and for the difficulty of being a guest in someone else's country." Something moved behind Fabrizio's eyes, not quite alarm, not quite understanding, a flicker. I switched to Italian. "For 3 years I lived in the Veneto. I learned your language the way you learn anything worth knowing, badly at first, then not badly at all. I want you to understand that I have heard every word you've spoken in Italian since the night you arrived in this country." The yard was completely still. "I heard what you said about my table, the table I built for my wife, who died 4 years ago. You called it something a child would make. I want you to know that she wept when I put it in our dining room, and that is a detail about my life that is not yours to have an opinion about." Fabrizio had gone the color of old chalk. "I also heard your conversation about creditors in Milan. About 18 months? About a lonely man who will sign anything if you make him feel like family first. I've had that conversation reviewed by people who understand international asset law. And I'd like your son-in-law to be to know, because I believe he didn't. I looked at Sean. He was very still. I came back to English, because what followed was for everyone. 3 weeks ago, I said Fabrizio offered me an investment opportunity. A family venture, he called it. A way to build something together across both our families. I reached inside my jacket and took out the folder. What it actually is, I said, is a collateral arrangement. If I had signed the document he handed me an hour ago at this party, my workshop and the land surrounding it would have been pledged against existing debts held by Fabrizio's company in Italy. Debts that have been accumulating for over a year. If that company defaults, and there is substantial reason to believe it will, international creditors would have had a legal path to the property my wife and I bought together. The property where I've built everything I have. I set the folder on the table beside me. I'm not angry about this, I said. I want you all to know that. I've had 3 weeks to decide whether to be angry, and I kept arriving at the same place. This is not a story about anger. It's a story about my son, who deserves to build his life on ground that no one has already mortgaged without telling him. The string lights hummed faintly overhead. Lucia had both hands over her mouth. She was looking at her father. Fabrizio found his voice. He said, I think there has been a serious misunderstanding. There hasn't been, I said. There's been a very clear understanding. That's actually the problem. I looked at my son. He was looking at Lucia. She was looking at her father with an expression I recognized. It's the expression of someone who has suspected something for a long time and is watching the confirmation arrive. Sean, I said, whatever you decide about your future, that's yours to make. I'm not here to make it for you. I'm here to make sure you make it knowing the truth. He nodded once. His jaw was working the way it does when he's holding something back. Lucia lowered her hands. She turned away from her father and looked at Sean, said something to him quietly that I couldn't catch. He took her hand. Fabrizio tried again. I let him finish one sentence. Then I said, the folder I accepted from you tonight, the draft agreement, I'd like you to take that back to Milan with you, and the Barolo. 60 people watched Fabrizio Benedetti pick up a folder from a table in his daughter's backyard and say nothing. Rosanna set her champagne down on the nearest flat surface and did not pick it back up. Sean crossed the yard a few minutes later and stood beside me. Not in front, not behind, beside. The same way he used to stand beside me in the workshop when he was young, watching me work, trying to be useful just by being present. He said, how long did you know? 3 weeks, I said. Why didn't you tell me earlier? Because you needed to hear it somewhere. You couldn't be alone with it, I said. You needed to be standing in front of people when it became real. He thought about that for a moment. Then he said Lucia didn't know. I believe that, I said. He looked at her across the yard where she was standing apart from her parents, arms crossed, saying something to them in Italian that I could have translated but chose not to. Some conversations belong only to the people inside them. Fabrizio and Rosanna left before the dessert plates were cleared. I don't know everything Lucia said to them in that corner of the yard. I didn't ask. She didn't tell me. That's as it should be. What I know is that she came back to Sean and stayed. The wedding is still on. Next fall, small ceremony, her parents not invited. Her decision, not mine, and one I never asked for. I drove home alone that night, the long way, on back roads, because I've always thought better with turns in the road. The workshop was dark when I pulled in. I sat on the back step with a glass of water and looked at the outline of the building against the April sky, the tools inside. The smell of sawdust and linseed oil worked into every surface over 25 years. A lonely man will sign almost anything if you make him feel like family first. He wasn't entirely wrong about the lonely part. 4 years is a long time to set one place at a table instead of two, but there's a distance between lonely and undefended, between missing someone and allowing that absence to be used as a door. Carol used to say the best thing a piece of furniture can do is outlast the person who built it. She said it about the table. Said she hoped someday our grandchildren would eat at it without knowing where it came from and love it anyway. I went inside and put the kettle on. Sean texted me just before midnight, 3 words, "Thank you, Dad." I held the phone a while before I answered. Thought about what I wanted to say. Thought about whether that was the same as what I needed to say. It was. Always I wrote back, "Get some sleep." I turned off the kitchen light and sat in the dark at the table my wife loved, in the house she helped me choose, in the life that is still mine to protect. They flew 6,000 miles thinking they'd found an easy mark. They forgot that easy looking and easy aren't the same thing, and that some men spent their 20s in a noisy workshop in the Veneto learning, slowly and badly and then not badly at all, that the things you build with your hands are the most honest thing about you. I still believe that. If this story meant something to you, hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I'll see you in the next one.